The icon is really a masterpiece of royalist propaganda. Here are Charles's words. "I will rather choose to wear a crown of thorns with my Saviour than to exchange that of gold which is due me for one of lead, whose embased flexibleness shall be forced to bend and comply to the various and oft-contrary dictates of any fashions." Altogether, the icon presents a portrait of a man whose religious beliefs are unwavering and whose political motives are untainted. This is the king's secret weapon. Were it to have been published before the trial, things could end very differently. There are just 48 hours until the trial. Every day brings Cromwell a fresh set of problems. Government lawyers engaged by the commissioners are still wrestling over the draft of the charges against the king. To add to Cromwell's woes, the court's Attorney General, William Steele, appointed to conduct the case against the king, sends word that he is very sick and unable to continue his duties. As the all-important chief prosecutor, his was the most important voice in this case. But on this occasion, he seems to have lost it. So all of a sudden, the commissioners need a new prosecutor.
John Cook is a fascinating person. He's a young-ish, he's in his 40s, barrister, and he's very bright. He's a brilliant, and he's of low birth. His parents were sharecroppers in Leicestershire, and he'd made his way because of his exceptional brightness.
And it's John Cook, a lawyer who's already part of the team, who's the next in line. Cook has the task of convincing the court and the country that a king is not above the law. He must challenge the divine right and sovereign immunity. He must prove the allegations against Charles with robust arguments and hard evidence. He must build a case which brings down the monarch, and perhaps the monarchy with it. It's a pretty tough brief.
He was rather overwhelmed and inclined to turn it down. He thought, I'm not good enough for this. I'm not respected enough to take on this, the greatest trial in history. And then his religious fervour overtook him. He said, well, maybe God is working through me to show that even the most humble barrister can be the agent of bringing down a tyrant.
The charge sheet has been going back and forth for days as the government searches for the perfect form of words. Cook and Cromwell have less than 48 hours to get it right. It's rejected, revised, and rejected again.
They're flailing around. They're not coming up with the right language for the charge. They haven't solved the problem of how you can prosecute a king.
It had been to and fro before the commissioners. It was too wordy. What they wanted, something much more short and snappy. And so Cook, in consultation with some of the commissioners, including Cromwell himself, finally drafted a tighter document.
Charles is to be charged in the name and on behalf of the people. This is a key phrase. Cromwell and the commissioner's dilemma has always been how to try a king if he is the embodiment of the law.
If you take an understanding of English law and the English legal system as it stood at the time, it is quite hard to justify the trial of a king. But crucially, the safety of the people is the supreme law, and that trumps everything. And there's a really interesting metaphor which gets used, which is, imagine you're on a ship. Now, obviously, if you're on a ship in the 17th century, then the structures of the government of that ship are very, very hierarchical, very, very strict. You can't launch a mutiny against the captain. But what if the captain is driving it into some rocks and he's going to kill everyone? then, of course, it becomes completely understandable that you have to mutiny against that captain and get rid of them. So that's how this kind of thing could be justified. It's a case of Charles being a danger to the people, so the natural thing that you should do is you should get rid of that danger, otherwise lots more people will die.
Throughout this crisis, there's one government body that's been a thorn in the side of the Commons, the House of Lords. The Lords have been blocked from the proceedings for voting against the trial, but they try another way. They try to thwart the High Court by preventing the use of the chosen venue, Westminster Hall. The Commons swat the Lords away, declaring that they are the supreme power in England.
Westminster Hall is chosen because it's the centre of public justice in England. It's where the law courts are held. It's where the most high-profile trials have taken place.
Symbolically, doing it there is a way of suggesting continuity with the English law as has gone before. And as much as it is a radical departure, it is kind of unlawful. I think this is a way of trying to kind of paper that over a little bit.
The 19th of January is the eve of the trial. The royal prisoner is moved from Windsor to London. He's heavily guarded for fear his allies will mount an escape attempt. En route, a man on horseback, one Mr. Proctor, watches the royal coach go by and doffs his hat respectfully. The king acknowledges the greeting, but the guards are furious and set upon poor Mr. Proctor, flinging him into the ditch, horse and all. The soldiers shed no tears for Charles's predicament. They blame him for all the hardships that have been imposed on them and their families. Imagine the king arriving back in the capital, the seat of his throne, after an absence of 7 years. It's a far cry from the welcome he would have expected. No fanfare, no flags, no ceremony. For much of his life, Charles has been surrounded by adoring crowds. What does this silent homecoming tell him?
So I think Charles senses the danger that he's in from very, very early on, actually. I think he knows how this ends. He's been worried about people trying to kill him for a long time. I think perhaps the realisation is becoming greater, becoming more real in late 1648. I don't think in early 1649 he thinks that he's going to get out of this.
Charles spends the night before the trial here at St James's Palace under armed guard. This is London's official royal residence, Charles's home, where he lived with Henrietta Maria, where his heir was born. Tomorrow he will face his subjects and his enemies to answer for his crimes against his country. It's the 20th of January. The day of the trial has come. Charles's barber arrives. But this is a barber provided by Parliament. Charles is nervous that this could be an assassination attempt. As a means of getting rid of a troublesome monarch, it has an obvious appeal.
Assassination would have been so much easier, and it's happened before with kings, Edward II, Richard II, Henry VI.
If you simply assassinate Charles, everyone will know that you've done it. You know, you can't just, pretend that something terrible has accidentally happened.
That's the point. They don't want a grubby murder in a castle. They want this to be out in the open. They want this to be as valid as possible. And it's something the army and Cromwell are proud of. They think this is a glorious thing, that they can bring a tyrant to justice.
they also want to justify it before God as well. And I think they know, or their view is, that God is, God may well have decided against monarchy, but God is definitely not in favour of extrajudicial assassination.
Cook and the commissioners are working up to the wire. With just hours to go, they're still tweaking the charge against the king. Cromwell is nervous. London is on high alert. The Tower of London supplies arms and armour for the 1,000-man guard charged with preventing rebellion or a royal rescue attempt. This is a display of military might, a clear message to the king and the people that the army is in charge. The commissioners might be running the trial, but it's military muscle which is enforcing it. This trial isn't taking place in the shadows. Cromwell is adamant that the king be exposed as a man of blood in the eyes of the people. There can be no venue more suited to this than Westminster Hall. Built in 1097, it's one of the oldest buildings in London. Having fought off the Lords' attempt to block its use, the hall is given over to what, for once, it's a gross understatement to call the trial of the century. Imagine this place. It's loud, busy and volatile, with 5,000 people tensely packed into huge viewing galleries. The court opens with a procession as 20 armed guards march into the hall, followed by messengers, ushers and the court crier. One official carries the sword of state. It's part of the king's regalia and symbolises the power of the monarch to use the might of the state against his enemies. The irony is that it's Parliament using the might of the state against Charles. Even the props of kingship have been turned against him. Lord President John Bradshaw occupies an elevated position. Behind him sit the commissioners. The eyes of England are on the drama as it unfolds. While the court assembles, the king is on his way to Westminster Hall. He's heavily guarded. There's great tension in the hall. Nobody knows quite what to expect. This could easily go the king's way. The court crier silences the bustling courtroom and asks each commissioner to stand and answer his name. The first on the register is Sir Thomas Fairfax. His name is called. There's silence. A masked woman shouts out from the crowd, "He hath more wit than to be here." The protester is Lady Fairfax. She does something that her husband doesn't dare to do. She speaks out to oppose the army, the court, and Cromwell. She's an indomitable woman. It's a pity that Charles doesn't have a few more men like her on his side.
And this is massive, that the wife of the head of the army can heckle the court in this manner in front of all these armed guards. It just shows that this is a live event and anything can happen.
The most important trial in history is about to begin. The king takes his seat right here. This trial will determine the power, authority, and legitimacy of the monarchy forever. It's going to be a high court drama like nothing the world has ever seen.
It must have been really disorientating for him. He sits down, he's got the crowd and the guards behind him. He can't see them, he can only feel them and hear them. And in front of him, he's got all these people that he barely recognises. He's got no legal counsel, It's just him.
John Cook stands. The charge sheet he's holding is the result of days of intense and exhausting work. This is the biggest moment of the young lawyer's life.
And as Cook is starting his opening speech, the king picks up his cane, which has a beautiful silver tip, and bangs the barrister. "Stop," he says, "hold."
And Cook carries on, and then Charles prods him again.
Cook ignored him. He poked him again. Cook ignored him. He then did it more firmly.
Bang comes the cane, the king striking the barrister.
And then the tip, the silver tip of his cane, falls off, and it rolls on the floor. And Charles looks at Cook as if, pick it up.
Cook refuses and continues his opening speech. And in view of thousands of his subjects, the king steps down at the barrister's feet and almost groveling to scrabble around on the floor to find the silver tip of his cane.
The symbolism couldn't have been worse. This is the king bowing before the majesty of the law, not the other way round. And many people saw it as a bad omen.
And this is the moment, this is one of the most important moments in British history, when the people see their king beneath the law. However high ye be, the law is above you.
Once Charles has recovered the cane top and his dignity, the commotion dies down and John Cook continues. The charge sheet takes 10 minutes to read.
So he's blamed for it all. He's blamed for all the death, all the destruction. He is branded a tyrant, traitor, and murderer, and a public and implacable enemy of the Commonwealth.